Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling something we all experience but maybe don't think about too much. Habits. We're diving into the power of habit by Charles Duhigg. And luckily, expert speaker is here to, well, help us make sense of it all.
Yeah, habits, they're so powerful, right? They can shape our lives in ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely. And Duhigg starts with this incredible story. It's about a woman named Lisa. When we first meet her, she's struggling. Smoking, jet, no job. But then she makes some changes, and it's like, whoa.
I know, right? Marathon runner, stable career, like what? It's a great example of how much potential we have to change. But it's not magic. It's about understanding how habits work.
Okay, so let's back up a bit. Before we get to Lisa's transformation, I think it's important to understand just how much of our lives is actually driven by habit.
Mhm.
Duhigg mentions some research from Duke University that found, get this, over 40% of our actions are actually habits, not conscious decisions.
It's wild, isn't it? Like we think we're in control, but so much of what we do is just on autopilot. Think about your morning routine. Do you really decide to do each step, or does it just kind of happen?
Now that you mention it, probably not. Brushing my teeth, making coffee, checking my phone, it all just flows.
Exactly. And it's not always a bad thing. Habits free up our brains to deal with, the new stuff, the complex stuff, but it's good to be aware of those patterns.
So if so much is driven by habit, how much can we actually change? The book also mentions this guy, Eugene Pauly. He had severe brain damage, couldn't form new memories at all, but somehow he could still learn new habits.
That's the part that really blew my mind. Like, here's a guy who can't remember what he did 5 minutes ago, but he can still find the kitchen for a snack, go for a walk, all thanks to habits.
That's so strange, but also kind of hopeful, right?
Uh,
Even with brain damage, there's this potential for learning and change.
Absolutely. And Eugene's case really highlights this part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It's like the habit center, you could say.
Okay, the basal ganglia, the habit center. So how does it all work?
Well, Duhigg talks about this thing called the habit loop. It's a three-part cycle. First, there's the cue, the trigger that tells your brain to start a behavior. Then comes the routine, the behavior itself. And finally, the reward, the good feeling that makes you want to repeat the whole thing.
So like, let's say my cue is, I don't know, feeling tired in the afternoon. My routine is grabbing a sugary snack. And the reward is that little energy boost and maybe a moment of, just not dealing with work.
Perfect example. And the more you repeat that loop, the stronger the connection gets in your brain. Eventually, the basal ganglia takes over, and it all becomes automatic.
Oh, so that's why it's so hard to break bad habits. It's
Yeah.
like they're wired into our brains. But what about cravings? Where do they fit in?
Cravings are a huge part of it. They're basically the anticipation of the reward. Duhigg has this interesting story about Febreze, the air freshener.
Yeah, I use it all the time.
So at first, they marketed it as an odor eliminator, like get rid of the bad smells, but it didn't really sell that well.
Really? I can't imagine my life without it now.
Right, but then they figured out something really clever. They realized people weren't just buying it to eliminate odor, they were craving that fresh, clean scent. That was the real reward.
So it's not enough to just remove something bad. You need to add something good, something people actually want.
Exactly. And that's true for so many habits. Think about the things you crave. Is it the taste of a certain food? The feeling of getting a notification on your phone? Understanding your cravings is a big step towards understanding your habits.
That's a really good point. So, okay, cravings drive habits. Let's go back to Lisa, the woman from the beginning. You mentioned she had this one keystone habit that changed everything. What was it?
Her keystone habit was quitting smoking. And, it wasn't just about the physical act of not smoking, it was about what it represented.
Like a mental shift.
Exactly. By overcoming this one really tough habit, she basically proved to herself that she could change. It gave her this sense of self-efficacy.
And that led to other positive changes.
Yeah. She started exercising more, eating healthier. Duhigg calls these small wins, and they build on each other, creating this upward spiral.
Keystone habits, small wins, upward spirals. Man, there's a lot to unpack here. Are there other examples of these keystone habits, like things that can have this ripple effect?
Oh, absolutely. Exercise is a classic one. There's even research showing that making your bed every morning can have a surprisingly big impact.
Making your bed, really?
Yeah, it sounds silly, but it's about starting your day with a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of order, and those feelings can carry over into other areas.
I never thought of it that way. It's like a mental trick to boost your was it a self-efficacy?
Exactly. And Duhigg doesn't just talk about individual habits. He also looks at how this stuff plays out in groups, organizations, even whole societies.
Oh, yeah. He has that whole section about how, like, businesses use habits to improve safety and productivity. Wasn't there a story about a football coach, too?
Tony Dungy, the coach who transformed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he was all about building habits, like training his players to react instinctively instead of overthinking.
So it wasn't just about physical skills, it was about mental habits, too.
Totally. And a big part of it was fostering this belief in themselves and the system. That shared belief became a real force for change.
Okay, so we've got habits in individuals, habits in teams, and we haven't even touched on how companies use habits to, well, let's be honest, sometimes manipulate us. We've got a lot more to talk about.
Oh, we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in the power of habit, but for now, I think it's time for a break. Where were we?
Oh yeah, companies and habits. Duhigg has these like fascinating examples of how businesses can actually use habits to, change things for the better.
Totally. Like that story about Alcoa, the aluminum company. When Paul O'Neill became CEO, everyone thought he'd be all about profits, right? Right. But his top priority was actually worker safety. Kind of a surprise move.
Yeah, but it totally worked. Alcoa's profits actually went way up, not down, and they became like a model for workplace safety. It's amazing how focusing on one key habit can have this like ripple effect throughout a whole company.
It's about creating a culture, a set of shared values. Your habits are a powerful way to do that. Like when everyone follows the same safety procedures, it reduces conflict, streamlines processes, everything just works better.
But it's a bit of a tightrope walk, right?
Yeah.
Because habits can also become a problem if they make a company too rigid, too stuck in its ways.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Duhigg talks about that too. He uses this tragic example, the King's Crossfire in the London Underground. They had all these well-established routines, but they were so inflexible that they actually made the fire worse.
It's a good reminder that we have to keep evaluating our habits, making sure they're still serving us, whether it's personally or in a company. But let's talk about something a little, well, creepier. How companies are using data to, like, predict and even manipulate our habits.
Yeah, the Target story is definitely a bit unsettling. They figured out how to tell which customers were pregnant, often even before the women knew themselves.
Just by analyzing their shopping data, right?
Oh.
Looking for those subtle shifts that might signal, hey, this person's about to have a baby.
Exactly. And then boom, they start sending targeted ads and coupons for, baby stuff.
Which totally worked. Their mom and baby sales went through the roof. It's kind of brilliant, but also like, whoa, Big Brother is watching.
It's a bit of a dilemma, right? On one hand, it's personalization, getting offers that are actually relevant to your life. But on the other hand, it's like, how much do we want companies to know?
Yeah, it's a trade-off. We need to be aware of what data we're sharing and how it's being used. Okay, but enough about the scary stuff. Let's get back to how we can actually change our own habits for the better. Duhigg gives some pretty good advice, right?
He does. He says one of the most important things is to identify your habit loop, that cue, routine, reward cycle. Once you know how it works, you can start to interrupt it.
And then, like, swap out the bad routine for a good one. So, like, if my habit is stress eating cookies at 3 p.m., maybe I try going for a walk instead. Same break time, but, healthier outcome.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you, experimenting a bit, and remembering that it's not just about willpower, it's about understanding those cravings and finding new ways to satisfy them.
And Duhigg also talks a lot about the importance of belief, right? Believing that you can change and having a support system to help you along the way.
Yeah, he suggests finding an accountability partner, joining a group, even getting professional help if you need it. It's tough to do it alone. Having people who believe in you makes a huge difference.
It's like that old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, this idea of like habits versus choices and what it means for, taking responsibility for our actions.
Right. It's tricky, isn't it? Duhigg brings up some cases where people's habits have led them to do some pretty bad things, like compulsive gambling or even violence. And it makes you wonder, how much control do we really have?
Yeah, it gets into those like deep philosophical questions about free will and all that.
Yeah.
But I think the power of habit just makes us think more critically about the things that drive our behavior, whether it's our biology, our environment, or our conscious choices.
It's about recognizing that we're not just puppets of our habits. We have the ability to understand them and then hopefully to change them.
So as we're getting close to the end of our deep dive into the power of habit, what's one final thought you want to leave with our listener? What's the big takeaway?
What really sticks with me is this. Habits are both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. They can make us incredibly efficient, help us achieve amazing things, but they can also hold us back, trap us in patterns that aren't serving us. The key is to become aware of them, to recognize the power they have, and then make conscious choices about which ones we want to keep and which ones we need to let go of.
It's about becoming like the architects of our own lives, not just letting things happen, but actively shaping the person we want to be.
Exactly. It's not always easy, but it's incredibly empowering. And the power of habit gives us the tools to start doing that. It's really been eye-opening talking about all this stuff about habits.
I know, right? It's like once you start seeing the world through this lens, everything kind of clicks into place. You realize just how much is driven by these like automatic patterns.
Exactly. And what I find so hopeful about the power of habit is that it's not just about passively observing these patterns, it's about understanding them so we can actually change them, both on a personal level and, even on a bigger scale.
Yeah. Duhigg talks about how the same principles that shape individual habits also apply to groups, organizations, even entire societies.
It's wild. Like the same habit loop cue routine reward that explains why we reach for our phones every 5 minutes also explains how social movements gain momentum or how companies build successful cultures.
So it's not just self-help, it's like a framework for understanding human behavior in all these different contexts.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of these often invisible forces that shape our world, and then hopefully learning how to harness that power to create positive change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like one final thought you want to leave with our listener? What's the big takeaway?
Well, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of habits, how they form, how to break them, how companies use them, and all that. But I think what it all boils down to is this. Habits are both our greatest asset and our greatest challenge. They can make us incredibly efficient, help us achieve amazing things.
But they can also like trap us in these negative patterns, right? Prevent us from growing, from reaching our full potential.
Right. It's about becoming aware of the habits that are shaping our lives, both the good and the bad, and then making conscious choices about which ones to cultivate and which ones to let go of.
And about taking ownership, becoming like the authors of our own stories, rather than just letting our habits write them for us.
Exactly. It's a process, a journey. It's not always easy, but it's incredibly empowering. And the power of habit gives us the knowledge and the tools to start that journey.
Well said. So to our listener, as we finish up this deep dive, here's our challenge to you. Take a moment to think about your habits. What patterns are shaping your life right now? Are they helping you or holding you back? And what changes, even small ones, can you make today to start writing a new story that's more aligned with the person you want to be? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of habit.